I had always believed my son Adam was my greatest source of pride. From the moment he was born, his tiny hand curling around my finger in the hospital room, to the time he took his first wobbly steps across the carpet in our old living room, I knew my life had changed forever. When his father left us abruptly, selfishly, when Adam was just 7 years old, I didn't crumble. I simply shifted. I became a mother, father, provider, protector, all in one. We made do, he and I, sharing. Scrambled eggs on a chipped plate some mornings, giggling about cartoons, sometimes crying together when the bills piled up higher than the groceries. We made memories in the little yellow house I'd inherited from my grandmother, the same house I spent the next 30 years paying off. Renovating slowly, one repainted window, one repainted wall, one penny saved at a time. I taught Adam the value of honesty, of hard work, of showing up even when the world told you to stay down. He wasn't perfect. There were signs, of course, moments of impulsiveness. Entitlement masked as ambition, but I chalked those up to youth, to the same fire I had once carried in my own chest. After all, what mother doesn't believe her son is destined for something great? At 62, I lived a quiet, intentional life. I worked 3 days a week at the public library, shelving books and running the Thursday children's reading hour. A job I adored, not because of the money. It was barely enough to cover my utilities, but because it reminded me that stories could mend things even when life tried to tear them apart. I had 2 close friends in the neighborhood, Janet and Pearl, who joined me for tea on Saturdays on my little balcony, overlooking the modest backyard where Adam once ran barefoot chasing bubbles. I had my peace, my routines, my garden tomatoes that never quite ripened in time, and my stubbornly independent cat, Pickle, who loved no one and tolerated only me. I thought I had done it. Ed raised a good man, built a life out of nothing, stayed afloat when storms threatened to sink. Me. I thought the worst days were behind me, until one Wednesday morning, when a heavy, official-looking envelope landed in my mailbox, thicker than the usual bank statements or grocery coupons. I carried it inside, brewed my tea, and settled into the cushioned armchair by the window to open it. I didn't rush, didn't expect anything sinister. I unfolded the documents, one after another, my eyes scanning lines of numbers. Interest rates, property terms, and the loan amount. $478,000. My hand paused, my breath caught. I flipped to the next page. There was my name printed in neat black ink, and below it a signature. My signature. Only it wasn't mine. It was close, uncannily so, but the loops were wrong, the slant off. I felt a strange chill run through me. I kept reading. There were mortgage documents, account withdrawals, forms signed and dated. All of them showed my name. All of them were forged. I began to tremble. It was like watching someone else's nightmare unfold on my coffee table, except it had my name on it. My chest felt tight, my tea went cold. I flipped through until I saw it his name, clear as day. Adam Parker. Listed as cosigner. The house address was in a high-end neighborhood I'd never even heard of. Then I remembered Marissa's dream house. She had once posted a photo on social media of a place just like glass railings, walk-in closets, a pool shaped like a guitar. If you could believe it, I called Adam immediately, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. When he picked up, his voice was casual, like it was any other day. "Hey, Mom," he said. "What's up?" I didn't waste time. "Adam," I began, voice low and deliberate. "Did you take out a loan in my name?" There was a pause. Just a second too long. Then came the deflection. A chuckle. An airy "oh, that thing." "Yeah, there must have been some paperwork mix-ups. Do you know how banks are?" My heart was pounding. "Don't lie to me, Adam. This isn't a mix-up. You forged my signature. You stole from me." He went quiet, heard background noise music. A television maybe, and then his tone shifted, defensive and annoyed. "Look, Mom, it's done now, okay? The house is for Marissa and me. You weren't using the money, you're fine. It's not like you were going to buy a yacht. My mouth went dry. You stole $500,000, I whispered. You committed fraud. You used your own mother. He sighed like I was inconveniencing him. Mom, calm down. You always overreact. It's just paperwork. And then he hung up, just like that. He ended the call like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. I stared at the phone in disbelief. The room seemed to shrink around me. My own son had taken my name, my credit, my trust, and pawned it off to buy a luxury home for a woman who'd never once so much as brought a dish to Thanksgiving. Marissa had always treated me like a distant obligation, too polite to be outright cruel, too cold to be warm. She never called me mom, never thanked me for the hand-sewn baby quilt I made when they were expecting. Oh, she once told Adam that my house smelled like old paperback novels, as though that were some kind of insult. And now they lived in a house with my name on the loan while I clipped coupons and took the bus to the library 3 times a week. I sat in silence for hours. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly felt deafening. The ticking clock on the wall mocked me with every second. I didn't cry, not yet. I just sat, trying to understand when my child became capable of such a thing. Had I missed signs? Had I raised a stranger? My thoughts spiraled. What if the bank came after me? What if I lost the house I had fought for all these years? What if I ended up one of those old women people pity in grocery stores, living on nothing, all because I loved too blindly? That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed with the documents spread out around me like shards of glass, each one cutting deeper. I stared at the ceiling, remembering the time Adam scraped his knee on the sidewalk and I carried him home sobbing. The time he got a B-minus and I baked a cake anyway. The time he graduated and looked for me first in the crowd. Had it all meant nothing? It's the next day. I tried to reason with him again. I called. No answer. I left a voicemail. No response. I texted, read, no reply. 2 days later, I tried again. Adam, please. We need to talk. This is serious. Finally, he sent a single message. I told you. Don't worry. It's handled. That was it. That was all he said. Like my life, my finances, my autonomy were mere inconveniences. I stared at the screen, and then something inside me broke. Not with fury, not yet, but with a deep, aching disappointment, the kind that roots itself in your bones. I stood up, gathered the papers, and put them in a folder. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew one thing with certainty. I couldn't let this go. I wouldn't be the mother who got robbed by her son and smiled through it. I wouldn't let Marissa sit poolside while I worried about whether I could afford my heating bill. Something had shifted inside me. I didn't have a plan yet, but I did. And when I did, I'd make sure they both knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After the shock wore off and the disbelief gave way to a slow-burning fury, I gathered the folder of forged documents, printed every text message Adam had sent me, and went down to the bank myself. The teller's friendly expression dissolved the moment I mentioned identity theft, and within an hour I was seated in a sterile glass office, speaking to a man named Darren, who introduced himself as a fraud investigator, but spoke with the warmth of a vending machine. I explained everything: how I had received the documents, how I never signed a thing, how my son had forged my name to buy a house for himself and his wife, and how my entire financial life was now entangled in a loan I didn't authorize. Darren nodded without nodding, scribbled into a notebook, and said with a Tory-Hearst tone that they'd open an investigation and get back to me within a few weeks. I asked if my payments could be paused until they sorted things out, since I had never agreed to them in the first place, and he shook his head. Until the fraud claim is resolved, the loan is still active under your name, ma'am. Ma'am? That word landed like a slap. I wasn't a mom, I was a woman who had worked her entire life to be careful, to be responsible, to be honest. And now I was being spoken to like a forgetful retiree who'd clicked a phishing link by mistake. But I said nothing. I just thanked him, tucked the folder back into my purse, and walked out of that building with my shoulders squared and my stomach twisted into knots. The very next morning, I filed a police report, brought everything, the emails, the loan, files, copies of my identification, even a sample of my real signature for comparison. I expected them to take me seriously, to understand the gravity of what I was reporting. But the young officer behind the desk officer, Langley, I think his name was Reed, through the report and blinked at me like I was telling him a story about a misplaced purse. "This is a family matter," he said, tapping the page with his pen. "It's complicated. Hard to prove intent." I felt my face burn. My son forged my signature on a loan for $500,000. That's not complicated, it's criminal. He shrugged, apologetically but unhelpfully. "We can escalate this, but even if we do, it'll be months before anything moves forward. These things take time, and without clear proof that you didn't authorize it, I didn't authorize it." I snapped. He looked up, surprised at my tone, and I realized how close I was to crying again. I pulled it together, straightened my spine, and thanked him before I left. Back home, the mail became an enemy. Every day brought a new reminder of what Adam had done: late payment warnings, escalating penalties, a notification from a credit agency that my score had plummeted over 200 points. My phone started ringing with numbers I didn't recognize, collections departments. Scam calls that suddenly didn't feel too far off from my real life. I tried calling Adam again, not to beg, not anymore, but just to make him face me. Didn't answer. Once he picked up and said, "Stop harassing me, Mom," before hanging up. That one sentence shook me more than I wanted to admit. Harassing, he made me the problem. And then the gossip began. My sister called one evening, her voice laced with caution. "I ran into Adam at the market," she said. "He told me you were ... going through something. He said you've been confused lately. Maybe you agreed to help them with the house but forgot." My jaw clenched. "Is that what you think?" I asked, heart thudding. She hesitated. "I don't know. You've always been generous. Maybe you forgot. Or maybe you didn't realize what you signed." I wanted to scream. Instead, I hung up. That night, I sat in the kitchen, staring at a cup of tea gone cold, and listened to the quiet thrum of my own isolation. Even the people who loved me the most believed him more, at least. They doubted me enough to wonder. Soon after, Pearl stopped coming by. She always used to bring muffins and talk about her grandkids. Now she barely made eye contact when we passed in the grocery store. Janet avoided me too. I caught her whispering to another neighbor once, and though I couldn't hear the words, I knew the tone. It was a pity, and pity was sometimes worse than hate. I felt like I was slowly becoming a ghost in my own life, a woman whose truth had become so twisted by someone else's lies that people no longer knew how to face her. Or maybe they just didn't want to. Maybe it was easier to believe I was slipping, that the years had caught up to me, that the lines on my face were signs of confusion rather than strength. But the final blow came the day I decided to go to the house. I needed to see it with my own eyes, the home my name was tied to. The place my son had stolen for a woman who wouldn't even let me hold her baby without wiping him down afterward. I took the bus across town, past neighborhoods filled with flower box windows and winding cul-de-sacs, until I reached the private gates of an estate called Stonegrove. I had to walk the final stretch. It felt like crossing a line I couldn't. Return from the house was massive, more of a monument than a home. White pillars, gleaming glass, marble entryway, and a curved driveway that wrapped like a silk ribbon. I walked up to the door, palms sweating, and rang the bell. It was Marissa who answered. Her perfectly contoured face froze for a moment before curling into a tight smile. "Oh," she said, dragging out the word like gum stuck to her shoe. "I thought you weren't speaking to us." I steadied my voice. "I want to speak to Adam." She raised one eyebrow and tilted her head. He's not here. And frankly, I don't think you should come by uninvited, considering your unstable behavior. I opened my mouth to respond, but she shut the door before I could say a word, just like that. Shut the door in my face. I stood there for a long time. The sun was setting, casting golden light over the white stone of the house. The house that bore my name, the house that was bought with a lie. I turned away and walked slowly down the driveway, past the manicured hedges and decorative lanterns. Past the lies that had been built into that structure like bricks in its foundation. I didn't cry until I got home. But when I did, it wasn't loud or messy. It was quiet, just tears sliding down my cheeks as I stood at the kitchen sink, staring out at the tomatoes that still refused to ripen. I let it all come out, the betrayal, the humiliation, the helplessness. Then I washed my face, made a list, and went to bed. That was the last night I cried, because I realized something fundamental. No one was coming to rescue me. Not the bank. Not the police. Not my family. Certainly not my son. I was alone in this, and I would have to save myself. Not through rage. Not through begging. But quietly. Methodically. Powerfully. I didn't have a plan yet, but I would. And when the time came, I would. Make sure they both understood that I was not the frail, forgetful woman they thought they could erase. I was their reckoning. Their reckoning was coming. The shift didn't happen overnight. Never does. Revenge isn't born in anger. It's cultivated in the quiet moments after the tears have dried and the heart has learned to beat through betrayal. I stopped speaking to people about what happened, not because I was defeated, but because I realized that the power they stole from me could only be reclaimed in silence. In strategy, in the steady, methodical rebuilding of my strength. I started by researching elder financial abuse, buried myself in forums and case law. Watched videos of women like me testifying with trembling hands and steady voices in courtrooms, where no one had believed them until the facts screamed too loud to ignore. I began to understand the mechanics of what had been done to me, not just the forgery, not just the fraud, but the deliberate manipulation of legal systems that my son and his wife had counted on me never having the stamina or knowledge to fight. They thought I would be embarrassed into submission, that I would retreat into my little yellow house and knit shawls in shame while they sipped wine on my dime in a house I'd never been invited into. They mistook my silence for weakness, but I was never weak. I was just preparing. The next step was finding someone who wouldn't treat me like a confused grandmother. I searched for days before I found her Amira Khalil, a lawyer known for handling elder exploitation cases. It's a kind of woman who had carved out a reputation for taking down slick-talking fraudsters and brokers, who preyed on the quiet and the trusting. Her office was nothing fancy, just a small suite above a bakery downtown, but when I met her, her handshake was firm, her eyes sharp, and her first question wasn't, "Are you sure?" but "How far are you willing to go?" I told her all the way, and I meant it. We sat together for hours as I laid out the timeline, the documents, the text messages. She highlighted every falsified page, flagged every point of legal exposure. And by the time we were done, the folder that had once made me cry became a weapon. She filed subpoenas for Adam's communication records, the mortgage paperwork, emails exchanged with the broker who'd somehow allowed a $500,000 loan to go through with laughable verification. We discovered the broker had previously been fined for similar irregularities, nothing big enough to get him disbarred, but enough to draw interest when connected to a new case. It wasn't just fraud now. It was collusion. While Amira built the case brick by brick, I turned my attention to the house itself. I reviewed the mortgage contract, every clause, every loophole, and realized something Vitladim and Marissa hadn't paid a cent out of pocket. The down payment had come from my credit. The loan was in my name. Every monthly installment was set to auto-deduct from an account they had linked to my identity. But the house wasn't fully owned. It was still heavily mortgaged and legally. I had rights. So I made a simple, silent decision. I turned off the tap, closed the account they'd tethered like leeches. I stopped making payments. Not out of spite, but out of strategy. Let the debt fall. Let the pressure build. Let them feel the walls tightened, like I had felt them when the bank called me with questions I didn't have answers to. It took 3 weeks before Adam called. At first, it was a voicemail. "Mom, you've got to fix this." The payment bounced. "We're getting calls." I didn't respond. 2 days later. "Okay, I know you're upset, but this isn't helping anyone. Just send the payment. We'll figure it out." I said nothing. A week passed, then came the anger. "I don't know what game you're playing, but you're ruining everything. Marissa is furious. Do you even care?" I listened to that message 3 times. Not because I cared, but because I wanted to memorize the moment he realized I was no longer his safety net. Then he called again, but this time his voice was different, strained, desperate. "Please, Mom, just ... Don't let it get foreclosed. We'll find a way to refinance. Just give me time." I picked it up that time. There was silence on both ends. Then he whispered, "You're really doing this?" I answered with calm clarity. "You made this mess. Now live in it." I hung up. Marissa, ever the queen of theatrics, took to social media. Her cryptic posts began populating Instagram and Facebook with veiled barbs. "It's always your own people who sabotage you," she wrote one day. "Jealousy runs deepest in bloodlines," another post read, overlaid on a black and white photo of their now slightly unkempt backyard. I didn't respond. Not publicly, not privately. Instead, I printed each post and handed them to Amira. "Pattern of narrative manipulation," she noted. "Good for jury perception, if it gets that far." I smiled faintly. I didn't need the court of public opinion. I just needed the legal one. Slowly, the pressure mounted. The bank began its own investigation under the weight of our complaint. The broker came under scrutiny, and the foreclosure process began rolling forward like a slow-moving avalanche, inevitable, devastating, and impossible to stop. Then came the day I'd been waiting for. The red notice was posted on their glass front door, a foreclosure sticker, large and impossible to miss, alerting the world that the luxury home built on deceit was no longer theirs. I went there, not to gloat, not even to confront, just to witness. I stood across the street in dark sunglasses, holding a simple paper cup of coffee, watching as a man in a city-issue windbreaker affixed the sticker to the door with cold efficiency. Moments later, the door opened, and Adam stepped outside. He was disheveled, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched. He looked across the street and saw me. For a full 5 seconds, neither of us moved. Then his expression changed: confusion, disbelief, maybe even shame. I didn't move. I didn't wave. I didn't blink. I turned and walked away. That was the moment he knew. The mother he stole from was gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned the art of quiet vengeance, who didn't need to raise her voice to bring the house down. She just needed to stop holding it up. What they built with lies, I let crumble with truth. And I wasn't done yet. The foreclosure didn't bring me joy, but it brought closure, the kind of closure that doesn't come with confetti or applause, but with a deep breath in the morning, when the sky looks wider and the air doesn't weigh so heavily on your chest. When the house finally went back to the bank, when Adam and Marissa packed their luxury dreams into cardboard boxes and drove away with nowhere to go that wasn't earned by theft, I felt no need to celebrate. My victory wasn't about their loss. It was about reclaiming what they had tried to erase in me: the right to be respected, the right to be believed, the right to live free of manipulation disguised as family loyalty. Amira called me 2 weeks later with a calm confidence in her voice that told me everything I needed before she even said the words. "The court accepted the forgery evidence. Your name is clear." She paused, then added, "They've ordered restitution, though I wouldn't hold your breath." I didn't. I knew Adam didn't have money, not anymore, and even if he did, I had no interest in his apology wrapped in cash. The real win was mine already. My credit was slowly healing. My dignity was no longer bruised every time I opened the mailbox. And in the settlement process, something unexpected happened. The bank, trying to avoid deeper scrutiny into their failure to properly verify the loan, offered a small monetary settlement and, as part of the agreement, relinquished ownership of an asset they had acquired mid-default Maurice's boutique, a failed vanity project that had been part of the loan Adam orchestrated. I didn't laugh when I saw it listed in the paperwork. I didn't even smirk. I just signed the acceptance, and with one signature, my real signature. This time I took back something they never expected: power. The boutique was a narrow, dusty property tucked between a closed record store and a laundromat with a flickering sign. The windows were still frosted with Maurice's former logo, looping gold cursive M, that looked more like a signature than a brand. The first time I stepped inside, the lights barely worked. The floor was covered in dust and the remnants of abandoned inventory mirrors, racks. A few boxes of unsold handbags littered the space like ghosts of delusion. Most people would have seen it as a loss, a burden, but I saw it differently. This wasn't a ruin. This was a blank page. I didn't want a boutique. I didn't want anything that reminded me of their arrogance. I wanted something simple, something real, something healing. And I knew exactly what that was. I poured my savings into the renovation, not much, but enough. I painted the walls a warm cream, added bookshelves salvaged from a closing bookstore, and brought in mismatched but cozy chairs from thrift shops. I laid soft rugs down, hung string lights across the ceiling, and stocked the shelves with paperbacks. That had carried me through lonely nights and complicated decades. I called it Eleanor's Nook, not just a name, but a reclamation of identity. I was no longer just Mom. I was Eleanor again. I served tea in mismatched porcelain cups, offered scones from a local baker, and every Friday night we hosted open mic poetry, acoustic sets, and story circles where people came not just to read, but to be heard. Every Saturday at noon, I ran a women's circle called Second Chances. It wasn't advertised, it spread by word of mouth, through quiet whispers between friends and sisters and coworkers. Women who had been betrayed, discarded, underestimated came in, took a seat, and shared their stories. Some were barely more than a whisper. Others were raw and defiant. All of them were brave. The Nook became a haven, and in time it became successful, not wildly, not flashy, but enough. Enough to pay the bills. Enough to prove that something beautiful could grow from ashes. Enough to remind me that I was not what they tried to reduce me to. Occasionally, Adam would drive by. I knew his car, now a dull, dented silver sedan, the kind of car that looked tired even standing still. Sometimes he would park across the street, engine idling, watching from behind the glass like a boy pressed against a window he could no longer open. I never waved. He never got out. He wanted to. I think there were moments he imagined walking in, hearing the bell above the door ring, seeing me behind the counter serving tea to someone who knew nothing about the story behind my steady hands. But he never did, and he never would. 'Cause he knew what I had become. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't even disappointed. I was done. And that, more than anything, terrified him. Marissa left him 6 months after the foreclosure. Apparently, she'd grown tired of being held back and needed someone with vision. She took the last of their wedding gifts and what little remained in their shared account and moved in with a tech executive 3 towns over. Adam tried to contact me after that. A long, rambling voicemail. Something about apologies, second chances, how people make mistakes. I deleted it. Not out of malice, but out of peace. I didn't need his words. I'd already healed. The people in my life now were the kind who brought me seeds from their gardens and poetry handwritten on napkins. I didn't need the ones who took without asking and offered guilt when grace was too much to give. I never blocked his number. I never changed mine. I didn't need to. The silence between us was louder than any boundary I could draw digitally. And I liked it that way. Sometimes people ask me why I didn't press for jail time, why I let him go so easily. The truth is, I didn't. I just chose a different kind of justice. The legal system gave me back my name. The foreclosure took back the house. The silence took back my peace. And the boutique, that was mine. Purely, completely mine. No stolen name, no forged signature. Just Melanor standing behind a counter, offering warmth to strangers and watching the light shift through the window at sunset. I often thought about the irony of it all, how Adam and Marissa had taken so much from me to build a life of status. And in doing so, had handed me the keys to a life of substance. Because in the end, what they gave me unintentionally, selfishly, and without a single thought for the consequences, was freedom. The freedom to stop being the version of myself that lived for them, forgave them, carried them. The freedom to stop making excuses for the disrespect masked as dependence. The freedom to exist for my own joy, my own peace, my own story. And so I wrote that story every day in quiet moments and small victories. I wrote it in the smile of a college girl who found a secondhand copy of her favorite childhood novel on our shelves. I wrote it in the trembling voice of a grandmother who read her poetry aloud for the first time in 50 years. I wrote it in the gentle clink of teacups and the soft flicker of string lights at dusk. My story wasn't one of revenge, was one of reclamation. I had been forged into a victim, reshaped by betrayal, nearly broken by someone I once held, against my heart like the most precious thing I'd ever known. But I came out on the other side not bitter, not cold, but steel-hard and serene. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer afraid. I was Eleanor. And that was more than enough.